A lot of times people will say, you've changed. And the reality is, you've grown, right? And if I've grown and you haven't, then you're going to perceive me as changing.
Yeah.
And so you got to be confident that parts of us that need to change, and by that I mean maturing and growing, is different than trying to assimilate beyond yourself to be like the culture.
Yeah.
Hey guys, welcome to the Troy Gramling podcast. I am so glad you decided to join us on this incredible, it's Thursday where I am. I'm not sure where it is where you are, but I'm glad you're here today. And it's our heart, our passion to partner with you so that you can reach your potential. And I'm incredibly excited because I've got a book coming out, and I thought, what better person to talk to about the book than my own son. So, hey, hit subscribe, share it with somebody, and welcome to the podcast, Tyler.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Now, I have to ask you, why do you think I'm the best person to sit down with and talk about your book with?
Well, because you were here for most of the personal part that I wrote in the book, and you can testify whether it's true or not.
Oh, okay. I like that.
Keep me honest.
And I'm just a great podcaster.
You're a great podcaster.
Great podcaster.
Incredible preacher. Amazing husband. Awesome father.
That's why I showed up, just to hear all the great things about
an
myself.
Amazing person.
Well, I'm excited to be here. I'm really excited for this book. I know we've talked about this before, but this has really been like almost 10 years in the making, right? You would say it's been a long time. I would say long overdue, but we know God's timing is always perfect. So even though it feels overdue, it's not, it's the right time.
Well, maybe a little bit, because I might have been a little slow in listening to what God wanted. Writing's not, you're a good writer. So, but I'm not as confident in writing. And so it may have took me a little longer.
Well, but what I love is that you actually talk about that in the book, about being slow to listen to God. And I feel like a lot of the book you share about from your own experience, even sometimes your own personal failures. And I think that helps relate to the audience, is like, hey, when we talk about potential, we're not talking about perfection. We're not talking about just a linear journey to becoming who God created you to be. A lot of times it's up, down, 3 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing. So, but I'm excited about the book. I have had the opportunity to start reading it. And I think it's going to help a lot of people. And I thought it would be fun to kind of sit down with you and kind of just explore more about the book, to kind of whet our audience's appetite for those who maybe haven't yet pre-ordered the book, to kind of show them this is a book that you're going to want to get. This is a book that you're going to want to take the time to go through and to highlight and to reflect upon. And, the book is kind of split up into 3 different sections. And I thought it'd be fun to take the first section today, part of this podcast, and kind of break it down and ask you some questions and give you an opportunity to kind of share your heart, maybe go a little bit deeper. And that first section is self-discovery. And my first question to you is, what do you think self-discovery has to do with someone's potential?
Yeah, well, I think the hardest part when it comes to potential is to believe you have it. It's very easy to see the things we don't do well. It's like I just shared, right? I don't feel confident when it comes maybe to putting the words on the paper, but it's more difficult to see the things we do well.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times it's difficult to see our potential. So to me, that ability to realize that I can be more than I am, I'm not limited by who I am today. Potential is not just who we are, but it's who we can become, who God created us to be. And with every step towards our potential, that potential gets even bigger, but I think that's the most challenging aspect. And that's why I think self-awareness is so important, is to realize that we were all uniquely created by God to do something of significance. And that's not always easy. I don't know why it's so easy to see our screw ups. I can't do this. I'm not even good at that. I mean, I can quickly tell you all the things I'm not good at. But if you were to say, well, what do you think you're good at? You know what I mean? That would be hard to do.
Yeah.
So I think, but until we are open to that and embrace that, we'll never reach our potential.
I think it's so true. I think most people can quickly name off their faults, their flaws, their insecurities, but it takes us longer to name off the things we do well. I was actually having a conversation with somebody about that very thing and saying, I could tell you real quick right now, I could give you 10 things that I feel like I'm failing at, but if you asked me what I'm succeeding in, it would take me a lot longer. I'd have to really sit down and think about that. So I think that is part of the human experience and our flesh to focus on what we're not rather than focusing on who we are. And if we don't embrace who we are, we can never get to where God wants us to be. And I feel like especially the first section of the book really digs into embracing who God made you to be. And you share from your own personal experience about that as well. And I think I don't know if it's a quote or it's a header, but you talk about, God wants to use the you that he created, not the fake version of you, not a manufactured version of you, but the you that he created. And I think that there's a lot of freedom in that. And like you said, for some people, it's that they don't believe they have potential. I think for another group of people, it's like they may wrestle with the idea of having potential, but they can't envision it because they don't really know their purpose or their calling or what they were put on this earth to do. So what would you say to kind of encourage someone who's maybe struggling to know their purpose or identify their calling? What are some things they can do in the meantime to not lose hope?
Yeah, well, years ago, Rick Warren wrote a book, and in it he talked about how we are shaped, and he talked about our spiritual gifts, our personalities, our heart. I misspelled shape. Told you I'm not good at words. Shape. All right. Our spiritual gift. H, our heart, what we're passionate about. A is our abilities. P is our personality. And E is our experiences.
That's good.
And he talks about in that book about how really when you go back and kind of evaluate those things, it helps you kind of figure out at least what direction in which to take the first step.
Yeah.
We want the whole answer before we move. And I think the best way to discover potential or purpose is really just, you got to take a step. Then you got to start somewhere, right? You can 360 degrees, you can step in any direction. And so I think if people, leverage or borrow Rick Warren's shape and just think about that, what are my abilities and what kind of personality do I have? And what have I experienced in my past? And what am I passionate about? And then step in that direction, and you kind of be able to determine, is this the right direction or no? I don't want to go this way anymore.
Yeah.
I want to go in a different direction because, we can misread things. And I think that's not failure. That's just becoming more aware of what we really do well, what really potential is available to us.
Yeah. It's really just about taking a next step.
Uh-huh.
And I think a lot of people are afraid that if they make a wrong decision, they're going to lose time, not realizing there's so much time that they're losing and just not taking a step. I heard this from a preacher say one time that your next step is more important than your misstep. We can't get caught up on the missteps that we miss out on taking next steps. Cut that clip right there. That's a good one. But, like I said, I've had the opportunity to read the majority of the book, but I have a lot of just quotes that stand out to me, but I'm curious for you as the writer of the book, especially when it comes to that first section, self-discovery, do you have a favorite chapter or a favorite story or quote or phrase?
I like actually the last chapter in that section talks about finding your voice, because I think that's a very exciting moment when you begin to discover who you really are, what you were created to do, and therein lies the journey. It's kind of the beginning of the journey. You go through all the 4 chapters figuring out, who you are and looking at all the different perspectives of who God's created us to be. And then as you begin to find that voice, I think is a really important time. And I talk in the book about how it's okay to borrow somebody else's voice as you're discovering your own, as opposed to not talking at all.
Yeah. That's good.
So that's my favorite section, that whole idea of finding out who you are, and then the courage it takes to share it. When I talk in there about how when God gave us the vision here at Potential, and it took me a while. It was so different. Your mother and I started a church, and I don't know if you remember it, but in Arkansas, when you start something, you have a vision from the beginning. that's the reason we started it.
Yeah.
Because we had a vision. We knew what we were trying to do and where we were trying to go. Well, I didn't come here to be lead pastor. I came here to do a young adult thing. And then Pastor Dan left and I became the pastor.
Yeah.
And so I had to discover the vision.
Yeah.
I didn't come with a vision. I had to discover that. And so in the meantime, I couldn't just sit around and go pray. You know what I mean? I had to pray and act. And in the short term, I borrowed vision, in the sense of, or you might say someone's voice. Well, let's do this and let's strategize or structure it like this as we tried to figure out, what God wanted to do here. And I think that's a lot better than just not doing anything at all. As we talked earlier, that's the biggest danger. And I think the reason that it's so easy for us to not reach our potential.
Yeah, I love that. Well, you kind of touched on that story that's weaved throughout the entire book. But the story of, being planted there in Paragould, Arkansas, and feeling a nudge from God. Our family moved to Little Rock, where the plan was to plant a church, and that fell through. And then, lo and behold, we find ourselves in South Florida. And South Florida is very different than middle of the country, Arkansas, And so you talk about in that book about going from, having purchased a home and having land to, our family moved into a mobile home here in South Florida. You talked about going from lead pastor to parking lot attendant. Mom went from being able to, stay at home and raise the children, which was one of her dreams, to having to go back to work and all these different sacrifices. And I think it's a story that is going to resonate with a lot of readers and a lot of listeners as well. Because we all have those moments where life has taken a really drastic turn and it feels like has all our hard work led up to this moment that feels like failure. And I wanted to ask you, I kind of have two questions when it comes to that story. The first one is, was it different than you thought? Like when God had nudged your hearts to move our family here, did it look different than what you thought? Different than what you had imagined in your mind when you moved here? And was there a defining moment where it's like, okay, we have to stay? Because I'm sure there was temptation to go back to what was familiar and comfortable. What did that defining moment look like?
Well, I don't think when we first came, I think we loved it. And because I feel like, I fit better here than maybe I did in Arkansas. So from living here, I think from day one, we really enjoyed it. All the opportunity, all the people, all the cultures, all of that. But then, of course, ministry was different, in the sense of going from leading globally to not leading globally. And so I think that was challenging. But you're always going to have those thoughts of, I'm just going to quit. I'm just going to go back, or I'm just going to coach in my case. But I think when I've always had this sense that I can do whatever I want, but if I don't do what God's nudged my heart to do, what he's calling me, if I'm not obedient, I'm not going to be happy. So even though I do what I want, I'm not going to be happy, And so I think that's kept me from making some bad decisions, whether I was in college or now. It's just not, is knowing it's not going to lead where I want it to.
Yeah.
And that's frustrating at times, especially when you're wanting to just do whatever you want to do, but it's not going to take you where you want to go.
Yeah.
It's kind of like you're in the car and you're driving and, you'd like to go right because maybe you want to look at a lake or something you can see, but that road doesn't take you home.
Yeah.
So you can go down it, but it's not going to get you to where you're trying to ultimately go. And I think for me, that's what always kept us here.
Yeah.
And then, out of nowhere, Pastor Dan decides to leave and I get the opportunity to be lead pastor, and we've been here for 24 years. But I think knowing from day one that all that South Florida is, we have really enjoyed.
Yeah. No, I'm so thankful. Not that our hometown in Arkansas, there's anything wrong with it. It's great people. Our family still lives there. We always enjoy going back there. And, it's got its own unique beauty as well. But I think I'm thankful for the experiences that I've gotten to have here in South Florida. And, there's no doubt that there's a huge culture shock. And of course, our family experienced that. But I've always been curious. I don't know if I've ever asked you this question before. How did you intentionally adjust to the culture that you found yourself in without altering who you were? Because obviously, you know, as we're talking about self-discovery and authenticity and confidence, you know, that requires confidence to adjust to the culture that you're now in, because you have to adapt, you have to pivot, but without changing who you are. I think you did that well, but I'm curious, what decisions did you make? Like, how was that a process? How did that work?
I think for me, it started with basketball, because being a good athlete, I think, gave me the confidence early on. And whether it was starting a church or whether it was moving, all the things that are risky, I think the confidence that I had, of course, you know, I hope that it came from God, but just, I think having success in athletics gave me the confidence to embrace the challenge or the change. And I think the other thing I think is enjoying fashion. You know, if you like fashion, then you're gonna look different. You know, I mean, not different than everybody, but you know, most people dress the same.
Yeah.
And then there's a sense of fashion, and those folks who have a sense of fashion tend to always look different. You know, they have a sense of fashion, they have that in common, but how they display that looks different. So I think those things gave me the confidence. Now, where I was tempted to be like, you know, the culture is when things weren't going well. And, you know, and then you look at other pastors who don't, you know, culture like me. You know, maybe they wear a suit, maybe they don't have tattoos, maybe they, you know, all those kind of things. That's to me the greatest temptation. Wasn't the culture of South Florida, but it's when things didn't go the way I wanted, to think, well, maybe it has to do with who I am. So I'll try to be another pastor. And, you know, I always had those thoughts. I'm thankful I never, you know, fully embraced them and like tried to become somebody else or preach a different way but I think those temptations are probably there for everybody at different times in our lives to become like the culture or like those that we see are successful. And in today's world, I mean, we didn't have social media back in the original, you know, we had internet, but it wasn't anything like it is today, where you have to compare yourself to people who are pretending. I mean, they're not even who they are, they are, you know, and yet you have to compare yourself to those folks, or we do compare ourselves to those folks.
Yeah, no doubt it takes a lot of confidence, a lot of maturity, but I think also a lot of self-awareness to not change ourselves. You know, like the temptation when life is not going the way we want it to is we're tempted to change who we are in order to change the what that we're experiencing. And like we said, you know, God wants to use the you that he created. And I think it takes a lot of self-awareness to know how to navigate those temptations and not forsake who God created us to be. And in chapter 3...
Oh, before you get there, I just want to mention, because there's a difference between, because here's the thing, because people are going to accuse you of changing when in reality it's just growth.
Yes, go there.
If I grow, I'm changing. A lot of times people will say, you know, you've changed. And the reality is, you've grown, right? And if I've grown and you haven't, then you're going to perceive me as changing. And so you got to be confident in you know, the parts of us that need to change. And by that, I mean maturing and growing is different than trying to assimilate beyond yourself to be like the culture, you know, but
that's really good.
So I think that's important, because there is a difference there, and you're going to be accused by others of changing. You just, you know, you're just not who you used to be. Like if we went back if we were to move back to Arkansas, again, nothing to do with Arkansas, but there would be certain people who I'd look at and I'd think, wow, they've changed. You know, they've grown. They would be different than they were when I knew them. And there would be others who would look at me and say, oh man, you've changed, because I have. But there'd be some who haven't. And that's, you know, more sad, because you're not, when you think about potential, to reach our potential, we have to grow, we have to mature, which is different than trying to be somebody you're not.
I love that you said that, because isn't our tendency to want people to accept how we've changed and how we've matured and to have grace, but we don't usually offer that same grace for other people in our life. Like, I know my tendency is, if I, let's say, had a negative experience with someone and it's been 5 years since I've seen them, rather than thinking, oh, I'm sure that they've matured, I'm sure that they've changed, I still see them through that negative experience or interaction. And there's so much truth to that. Is like, when change happens all around, and on the flip side of that, are we also willing to embrace that others will change for the better as well, and that they've matured just how in how we have? So that's really good. And in chapter 3, you talk about being self-aware in different ways to actually cultivate a life of self-awareness, which I love that you talk about that in the book, because it's one thing to say, hey, we should be more self-aware. It's another thing to talk about how we can actually practice and discipline ourselves to be more self-aware. And you talk specifically about observing others' conduct, and kind of, I love that. I've never really thought about it before, but seeing how others respond to different situations can also help us learn to mature in similar situations. And you talk a little bit that you're a people watcher, and I'm a people watcher too. I enjoy sitting down and just watching people's natural interactions and just observing. What is one thing that you would say you've observed or learned about the condition of the human heart by observing others?
Yeah, I think there is a tendency in all of us to think that everyone sees the world through our eyes, and in reality, very few do, and that's probably a good thing.
Yeah.
But I think that it's very easy for us as human beings, as humanity, to be frustrated, to be angry, and assume that everybody sees and agrees with our anger and our frustration. When I think if you watch people, most of the time, you're going to think, well, that person's a goofball, or they're an idiot, or they're, why are they so frustrated at Walmart? Why are they so frustrated? I saw a lady yelling at the police officer yesterday at the airport, and I wasn't thinking, poor lady, right? I was thinking, and so I think it reminds us that as humanity, as these folks who carry our peopleness around with us, that we have a tendency to be selfish. We have a tendency to allow ourselves to get frustrated about what's happening to us, and think that the person standing beside you at Walmart agrees with you, or the person on the freeway, and they don't, because most of the time we are being selfish. We're being just focused upon ourselves, and I think that helps before the next time you want to go off or you want to say something, to stop and think, am I being selfish? Am I just responding out of my own nature, as opposed to trying to think about it from the other person's perspective? Because when you're watching, you're not vested. So I can watch it from the clerk's perspective at Walmart, or the police officer's perspective, or whoever, and think, well, how do they? Because in the moment, if I'm mad or angry, I'm not thinking about it from their perspective. I'm thinking about it from my own.
Wow. That's such an important self-leadership lesson, but I think also just like leadership in general, how much different could our lives be, could our world be, if we learned to act more selflessly in situations that are less than ideal, rather than thinking of ourselves first? I mean, that alone could have the power to drive the results we want to see in our life, maybe more so than anything else. It's just that. So that's really good.
Well, you think a lot of times we don't even accept other people's perception of us. If people will say, "Oh, you're shy." I'm not shy, or you're a people. No, I'm not. Or you have a short temper. No, I don't.
You just made me mad.
Exactly. We have a hard time. It's hard. You can't be self-aware, if we're not even willing to allow what other people speak into our lives to be something that we think about, as opposed to immediately pushing back. I remember, for me, I really learned that when I moved here, and when I became pastor, and one of the pastors here, Pastor Allen, was telling me, okay, as the lead pastor, right, because he had been worship leader under Pastor Dan and now under me, he said, when you say something, people are going to hear it a certain way because of the chair you sit in. And there's real truth in that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to realize that the way we perceive ourselves is not necessarily the way the world perceives us. And, if we're going to make that journey to our potential, then we've got to know who we are.
Yeah.
You can't get to where you want to go if you don't know where you are.
Yeah. That's so good. I think even how you say it in the book, you can't go to a place you can't envision, so we have to know who we are. We have to have a vision for the future. And those are really the first two things that you tackle in your book: potential, the uncontainable power of God within you, which is getting set to release very soon,
June the 11th.
June 11th. And so, hey, if there's people tuning in, listening, you have not pre-ordered, listen, these are just some nuggets that come directly from the book. And if you've enjoyed this and you've received from this, man, I would encourage you, pre-order your copy. Don't wait. You listen, you want to make sure that you're one of the first to get this copy. You're going to be highlighting, you're going to be circling. And I think it's there's some of those books that you just go back to that you like. I know there's books that like every year, every couple of years, I go back to and I reread because it's so foundational. And I think this is one of those books that you're going to mark it up and you're going to go back year after year reading certain passages, certain chapters. So it really is a great resource.
Because we're all at different places on the journey. And when you pick up a book like this and you read it the first time, you're at one place. And if you go back and look at it, you're at another place. And, when we wrote it, my heart's desire, not just in writing the book, but in all of my life, is to be practical. Some people are theologians and they give us a foundation from which to write anything from or do. But to me, this is to try to take those truths that are foundational and then apply them in such a way that we can all put them into practice. It's an easy read, and so I do. I hope that people will be blessed and encouraged, and most importantly, I pray that people will reach their potential. Our world will be better with every person that reaches or gets a little bit closer to what God had in mind when he knit them together.
That's good. That's good. Well, if you guys have enjoyed this content, be sure to be sure to subscribe. If you're watching, on YouTube, be sure to leave a comment, leave a review and share it with somebody, if it's encouraged you.
Review. Not just a review. 5-star review.
5 stars.
Yes.
And
don't forget, we got a podcast. It drops every Thursday at 8 a.m. Because again, the goal is to talk to interesting people. And a lot of times just to talk to people that we all know, but maybe we've never had a discussion about potential. To not just talk to the celebrities, although we do some of that, but to talk to the baker and talk to the local politician and to talk to the stay-at-home mom and the home decorator, because those folks have a lot to add if we'll take the time to hear what they have to say. So that's every Thursday at 8 a.m. And then on Saturday nights, we do at 7 o'clock a live stream. And our whole goal is to build a community of encouragement. We're trying to do something different. I know that I can put a certain phrase on this podcast that is negative and it'll get more clicks than if it's positive. But our goal is we want to be a positive influence in your life. Influence in your life. That's the reason we wrote the book and so much of what we do here at Potential Church as well. So thanks so much for tuning in. Tyler, thanks for being on the podcast. And Tyler's going to join me next week as we continue to talk a little bit about the uncontainable power that's within every single one of us.
That's right.
Until then, have an incredible week. And we'll see you next time on the Troy Gramling podcast. God bless.